Hey there everybody, I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, a YouTube channel dedicated to the modern board gaming hobby. And in this 98th episode of the weekly Ratchet, I'm going to be talking about, well, the modern board gaming hobby. You know what, I think I pretty much already made that clear. Hey there everybody, welcome back to the weekly Ratchet. Yes, I know it hasn't exactly been weekly. No, I have not renamed the series. I'm probably not going to. It's fine the way it is, let's be honest. The last episode came out just before my 47th birthday. I could have filmed that weekend, but there had only been like 2 days for answers to come in the question of the week, so I didn't do that. I did have a great weekend. I'm just going out to a bunch of restaurants, places I really like to go, and that was kind of like the list. I just want to go and sort of have a festival of food, and that's what we did. I had a really great time. Got to play some games with my family as well. This past weekend, we actually kind of got back to moving into this house. It's still just boxes everywhere. Rooms are cluttered. We do have a guest room now, so, you know, if anyone's interested, I'm sure I could find some work for you to do. But I have gotten to play some stuff. I'm looking forward to telling you about it. I will go ahead and say real quick, it's going to be another few weeks before the next episode comes out. This weekend there's a family function for my wife's family. I immediately come back from that and then leave for Charlotte again on a business trip. I'll get to play some games maybe down there. I'm kind of looking forward to that. And then spending Father's Day weekend with my dad down there in North Carolina. And I won't be back until Sunday evening that weekend. It's 2.5 weeks from now, and I know that I'm already just completely booked up, which is kind of a bummer. So anyways, I'll get back to it here at some point. But until then, let's chat about some games. Okay, real quick, I'm going to recap a couple recent playthroughs of Cozy Stickerville. This I mentioned this in the last episode. This is a sort of legacy-esque, well, it is a legacy game, I would say, where you're simply building out this town, placing stickers all over the place. There's sort of a story booklet you're going through. Neat game. And I will say that my stance on it has improved just a little bit since the last episode. I generally do like the game. I like what it does. It is a cozy game. As I mentioned, I think in the previous episode, there is no end goal. There is no win or loss condition. I suspect there's going to be some sort of a, hey, if you've gotten this many points, then you've done great. I don't know. But the one thing that I kind of lamented, and it's still somewhat the case, is that, you know, there's only 12 rounds, 12 sort of turns per year, 10 years per game. And so if you're playing at, you know, some of the higher player counts, we're playing right in the middle at 3. We only get 4 turns in an entire game. Sometimes you get opportunities to exceed that. In fact, we played this at a brew pub in, I think it's Mason or Madison, Virginia. And I was like, hey, it's my birthday. It was my birthday that day. I was like, I'm going to take the first turn, and then drew a card that basically gave me the chance to get up to 2 additional actions in that turn. So I took 3 turns on my first turn, and that was fun. But I will say, and I think I mentioned it, that you may have a turn where, okay, we're really low on resources, so I'm just going to spend my turn to gather some resources, which is not fun when you compare it to the next player's turn, who may spend those resources and get to do a bunch of stuff, put out new stickers, maybe explore one of the emergent stories in the game, etc., and you can kind of feel a little lackluster when all you do on your turn is gain some resource. We're seeing less of that, thankfully, as we actually do have a pretty decent engine going right now. There is something of an income that happens at the beginning of each round, and that's getting pretty good for us. It may not always. We've been quite careful in preserving that income that we get. And so that has worked out pretty well for us. And we're having a lot of fun with this. We're up to year 8, 2 years left to go. My daughter's been out of town for about a week and a half. And then, of course, I'll be out for a week. So it is going to be a while before we get to revisit and finish Cozy Stickerville. Also, I will say, plays fairly well in a small footprint. We have seen. So that's been a nice experience. Up next, I talked about this one before as well. Daniel joined me. We did a game night. I think this was maybe a week or 2 ago. And we revisited Nova Era. This is from Simon. And I talked about this one last time, and I think I mentioned that I got some rules wrong. And so we are a lot more careful to get the rules right in this game. and it still didn't really improve my experience with this. Real quick, this is a civilization game, fairly abstract, where you're drafting these cards from a central display. You've got a variety of technology cards. There's also a couple of personality or leadership cards that can come out into play as well. You are going to be selecting a tray of dice, kind of like the game of Azul, but you're going to select 3 dice that you're going to then use for each round of the game. There are, I think, something like 9 rounds in the entire game. And you're going to use those dice to take actions. Those actions may just give you some additional resources. They may let you sort of draft these cards. You may be able to research the cards and actually get them into play in front of you, or develop, whatever the actions are called. Acquire those leaders, those personalities, whatever. The dice that you don't draft each round then go to pip up these tracks in the middle of the board, and these tracks can cause some unsavory things to happen, like riots, a military invasion, stuff like that. And you've kind of got to weather those storms. Those events may sort of damage your technologies, unless you have technologies in place that lets you withstand them. But then there's a big element of this game in that certain technologies, when they come out into play, they render other technologies obsolete. It may be as simple as, okay, you play a card and it tells you that 2 technologies become obsolete. And if anyone has those technologies in play, they have to lose them. They just simply lose that card. They lose that ability. It goes away. If you had that technology, you get a point for the troubles. But then later on, especially in the 3rd and final era of the game, you start to get cards that come out that wipe out entire series of cards. It may say that all starter cards of a particular color, and there's 4 colors in the game, all those cards go away. So if players have a number of those things that have just kind of lingered, and they might be giving small little engine building benefits, but usually by then there's stuff that you've kind of come to rely on, and they suddenly just get completely wiped away. And some of them are even more devastating than that. There's at least one particular card that it wiped out half of our tableau in my first game of this. It very much comes down to the luck of the draw. It comes down to, are any of those technologies out there going to synergize well with what I already have in play? Do they sort of fill a gap that I'm trying to compensate for? Maybe a resource that I don't seem to generate very well. There is also a bit of majority, where whoever has the most of each color of technology at the end of each era will score some extra points. Not a whole bunch, but a couple. A lot of the end game scoring, a lot of the end round scoring comes from these personality cards, which I did use to quite a good effect in this recent playthrough, but it still is just so damn swingy. As to whether or not this game is going to work for you, whether you'll have a good experience with it. Daniel struggled quite a bit, just couldn't quite get the right things out. Wasn't really able to lean into some of the leaders. Like I said, I got a whole bunch of those, scored a bunch of points, and I don't remember how much my lead was at the end of the game, but it was pretty decent. Not a total blowout, but the other thing about this, and I mentioned this in the previous playthrough, and I've mentioned that there's this sort of tableau of cards to choose from, but you only get to choose the bottom card of that row. So if you kind of get yourself into a situation, especially with a 2-player game, where none of those bottom cards are of any benefit to anybody, either they don't work with our current engine, or we simply can't afford to play them. They could all be a color card that nobody has an appropriate colored die to spend to get the card. And then you're just completely stuck. You're literally a turn or two might go by where you simply can't do anything. You could just spend a die to take one of those cards into your hand, but of course all that does is free up the next card, which might be beneficial to your opponent. And you may not get a crack at it. Of course, maybe they'll take it. Maybe the next one is good, but who knows? And so that just kind of created these situations where we're both kind of sitting there looking at the table going, all this is garbage. We don't want any of this. Like, why isn't there a way that we can kind of, maybe wipe the bottom cards or something that kind of keeps each turn a little fresh for each player? Anyways, that's Nova Era. I don't really recommend this game. If one of those things, maybe you could pick it up for super cheap, kind of explore it. Obviously, it's worth the play or two I got out of it for maybe $15-20. I think I got it on a pretty good sale. Other than that, I would skip over Nova Era. The last game I want to chat about here at the top of the show is another game I have talked about, but it's been a while since I played this one. This is Philharmonix by Arcona Games, or Archon. Oh, no, Arcona, I was right. This was a game that I was extremely excited for back in 2025. This is a game about traveling around in a spaceship, managing a traveling orchestra performing concerts to alien planets all over the galaxy. There is no other box in my collection that speaks to me than this. However, in my first playthrough, it didn't really quite click. I struggled with a couple elements of it. There's a bit of, it's not even randomness. I wouldn't call it randomness, but there's just sort of a lot of different things to manage. And one of the things that definitely is random is that there are 6 actions in this game. I'm not going to go into all of them. I would never remember them all anyways, but there are things like recruiting new musicians, which sit in this really nice little 3D cardboard stand, kind of like risers, you know, in a performance venue. You might be upgrading your musicians. You might be upgrading your own conductor, basically yourself, to be able to get a little bit more out of the symphonies that you perform. You'll be gaining new symphonies that then you're able to perform. You'll be moving your ship. You'll be getting some money throughout the game. There is also experience points that you have to gain. And then there is this whole action point mechanism. And the way that that works is at the beginning of each round, I believe there are 5 rounds in the game, you're going to randomly place these 6 tokens on those 6 actions, and they will denote both how many action points you have to spend to take that action and how weak or strong that action is based on those action points. So regardless of the action, if there's only a 2-point token on it, it's very easy to take that action. It only costs you 2 of your action points. So we're talking 2. I think you start the game off with something like maybe 9. And so you can, even at 2 action points, you're going to get through that pretty quick when the highest number is 6 action points. But anyways, you're going to be able to do that action easily. It's only 2 action points, but you're also going to get a very, very weak action out of that turn. You're only going to be able to do that action at one of its sort of lower values. So for example, if you're recruiting musicians, you might only be able to recruit 1, versus if you spend 6 action points, if that is the token on the action, you can maybe recruit 3 musicians. And again, it's very random in how those tokens come out. And so you may find yourself, well, I really need to do something. I surely don't want to do it at 6 action points, or I really, really need to do something, but 2 action points simply isn't enough to make the impact that I need to make. Now, the one thing I will say is that there are a couple different ways to get yourself some more action points. There is, of course, one particular action which lets you spend your experience to increase your action point limit. But there are also some other ways that I kind of glossed over in our previous play. So, for example, you can spend these little components called fans. You can pick them up a couple of different ways. And you can use them to lower your action tracker on your player board. So maybe you had already used 7 action points, you could roll it back to 6. There's a couple of other different ways that you can do that as well. But then there's also this idea that you can exceed the action point limit as long as you were beneath that limit when you started your turn. And so if I just have, if I'm at 8 of 9, I could go and do a 6-point action, putting me at 5 over, but I will then lose a couple of points at the end of the round. But you start off with something like 10 or 12 points at the beginning of the game. So it's kind of clear that the game expects you to do that. It expects you to kind of make up for early deficits by maybe leveraging some of your points to get some extra things done, maybe kind of build yourself up a little bit. And then by then you can start catching up increasing your action point limit so you're doing more at the end of the game without having to spend additional points. And I leaned into that a good bit more in this game. I did not really actually get to exceed my limit very well because there's also this idea that if you go to a space where another player has already placed their action pawn, then you have to either give them money, which I didn't care for that at all, or you have to spend an extra action point. And so a couple of times my wife was always just one step ahead of me, going where I needed to go. I kept wasting both my money and my action points, and so I wasn't really able to do that early in the game. But I did spend a lot of those fans. I did some other tricks throughout the game to lower my action point and get 1 or 2 extra turns. And in the last turn, in the last round of the game, I think I had 3 extra actions at the end of the game after my wife had already had to tap out. That was really, I think, the weakest part of this game for me. And so being able to sort of see the strategies that I think they built into this to kind of let you overcome that challenge really definitely gave me a much better experience with this game. I do love the theme. I will still say, and I think I mentioned this before, that the Art direction is a little lackluster. It's a lot of dark colors. It's a lot of just kind of bland, generic looking tokens and cards. I do kind of wish they'd prettied this up a little bit. I realize they're a relatively small publisher, probably did not have a massive art budget for this. I get it. I will say that, again, I think with this recent experience, it really made me feel a lot better about this game. And I think that, as I continue hopefully to get to explore it and see what else it can do, I will, that should kind of help me overcome the art challenge, right? I will mention, I think I said this before, I did play this solo and I didn't like it at all, as the solo player is not hampered by a lot of the rules that the actual human player is. And so the AI gets to cheat quite a bit in this game. And I did not enjoy that. I do not plan on revisiting that. So hopefully I can get some more people to play out Philharmonix with. Maybe I'll take this to Charlotte next week and see if I can get it played with a game group down there. All right, that is it for some recent games. Let's get to question of the week. All right, last week I asked you how much box damage is too much box damage. I'll go ahead and share now that this came from a recent purchase of the game of Everdell Emerlin, which I'll be talking about in the next episode, that was sold to me as new in shrink. And yet when I got the game, it had a clear kind of a crumple in the back of the box, kind of right where I tend to pick up boxes. Your fingers kind of get a little soft in the back of the box. I did mean to write off to the seller and basically just kind of say, hey, look, you really need to be disclosing this kind of stuff. What you did was wrong. I haven't even had a chance to do that. I wasn't going to bother trying to return it or get a discount or anything, but that's kind of what stemmed this discussion. So up first was Wonderflonium, who cautiously admitted that a ding or dent might make him sell a game from his collection, adding that, in his mind, the collection aspect of the hobby includes the box, even if maybe it shouldn't. You know what? I appreciate the honesty, and I will also say that, kudos for selling a game instead of maybe necessarily trying to just get a return or exchange it or something like that. And maybe there are still instances where you do that. I can certainly understand that. But yeah, hey, at least you know where you come from, right? Teshra, on the other hand, said he's come to accept and be fine with box damage, mentioning a recent purchase of Star Wars Rebellion that was missing the rulebook and had ripped corners held together with packing tape. That is perhaps even a little further than I'm willing to go. But I have seen folks like that, folks who pull a game off the shelf and it's covered in duct tape. And it does kind of make you go, well, hey, at least that game has possibly been well loved, right? Lancelot also has a higher than usual tolerance for a damaged box, but draws the line at damage to internal components. You know what? I think that's fair. I do think that there's probably a little bit more forgiveness in a damaged box. But yeah, if the components inside are damaged, and I've seen where one of the games I got actually had like it got hit so hard that the board was kind of wedged, the main game board was kind of damaged in one of its folds, and that upset me quite a bit. Red Panda Games likes the cardboard to be fairly well intact, mentioning his copy of Castles of Burgundy Special Edition, which has a corner that appears to have exploded from the inside. He said he hates it so much he's considered buying a second copy, and it's not a cheap game. Hey, I will say that even my tolerance is a lot lower when it comes to like special editions, collector's editions. If you're paying $200-300 for something, it better be in pretty mint condition. So I can agree with you on that one. Wayne Kruger is known to repair a box or two using craft materials when he purchases from a publisher. If he purchases from the larger retail chains, he'll tend to return and get a replacement. I will just say that does still typically affect the publisher. A lot of times when you return something to Amazon, they'll either back charge the original seller or force the product back to them, something like that. Of course, we all know that Amazon doesn't really like moving packages any more than it has to. Usually those things just end up in a landfill, the returns. And again, they'll back charge the seller because they obviously didn't make their money on that product. So just kind of a word of caution there on that one. D. Evergrace says his position on this topic has softened over the years. Where he used to be very picky about the condition of the games, he has come to accept a little damage here and there, as long as everything still works as intended. I think that's pretty close to where I fall in this as well. I certainly early on, everything has got to be immaculate. I actually remember when I got my copy of Gloomhaven, which was just a retail. I got it off a store at a hobby shop. And I noticed a couple of the punch cards were kind of off center. And they had a form you could fill out, of anything that was damaged or that you wanted a replacement of. And I asked for a whole bunch of different punch boards because I wanted my stuff to be nice and perfectly centered. And now I've noticed I punch games and some of them are just way off. Even my new copy of Everdell has one particular sheet where these tokens got punched quite off center. They don't have the white border visible. They're not that bad. But I didn't bother doing anything with it, and I've now played the game a couple of times, and frankly, haven't even noticed it. So I too will say that my tolerance has softened quite a bit on what I would try to get replaced or exchanged or something like that. Lastly, Jeremy Brooks said he's still a bit on the picky side, recently returning a copy of Parrots of Maracaibo that arrived with a significantly damaged corner. He said if it's his own fault, however, he'll attempt a repair. That reminded me as I was typing this into my notes, I got a copy of course, I have Meadow, one of my favorite games, and then I got the Meadow, I remember what it was called earlier today. It was the first expansion, Meadow Downstream, that's what it was. And I remember I was actually going to go and film with my mother for the video that I did on the Dice Tower channel. I had the Meadow box and the Downstream box in one hand, and I was carrying a bunch of lighting gear and such in my other hand. I leaned a little bit at the top of the steps. Both Everdell boxes fell and ended up edge over edge, just tumbling down the steps. The Downstream box almost completely ripped to shreds. I did fix it because, of course, not only was it my copy and completely my fault, but it was a review copy, so I couldn't exactly ask for a replacement on a review copy. I just kind of had to live with it. And I still have that box, and it's held up pretty well ever since then. But that was definitely my bad on that one. Anyways, that was it for Question of the Week. Thank you, as always, for your answers. Let's go ahead and get to some more games. All right, 3 more games to get here at the end of the show. First up is Compile. I've talked about this one a couple of times. This is the second standalone version of this game, kind of like a standalone expansion, if you will. It's called Main 2. They really thought hard about those titles. But this is a 2-player head-to-head card battling game where you are basically competing artificial intelligences trying to complete your algorithm of 3 different protocols. You're going to be playing cards into 3 columns. You're going to have these different protocols. Your opponent will have their 3 protocols. And basically you're trying to compile all 3 of your protocols, which requires having a sum of cards in each column that equals 10 or, not each column, but in a column that equals 10 or more and is at that moment higher than whatever value your opponent has in that same column. These protocols come in a variety of flavors, and there's of course the main 2 box. I have the main 1 box still downstairs, and they have themes like death, life, heart, love, light, speed, darkness, metal, water, whatever, all kinds of different just generic themes. And on each of the sort of title cards of these protocols will give you little tips as to what they do. So they may say things like shift or flip or draw or play, delete, manipulate, whatever, and those are things that those cards in that deck are sort of relevant to that theme will let you do. Shifting is moving cards, drawing is drawing more cards from your deck, playing is getting to play extra cards, etc. Each of those protocols has 6 cards that come with it. So when you pick your 3 protocols, you're going to have a deck of 18 cards. You're going to shuffle it, you're going to draw 5, and you're going to take turns playing a card into your side of this sort of board. And those cards have a variety of different effects. In fact, there are 3 different possible effects of each card. One of them comes into play every time that card becomes visible. So whether you play it, whether it was face down and you flip it face up, whether it was covered and becomes uncovered, that text always triggers off. There are also effects that are always in effect as long as that card is on the table. And there are finally effects that are in play as long as that card as long as the bottom of that card is visible, which basically means that card is not covered and it is face up. And real quick, Of course, I mentioned you've got 3 different protocols. You have to play the cards face up into their appropriate protocol. So speed cards have to go to the speed protocol. However, you can play them face down into any column that you want, at which point, if they later become face up, it doesn't matter where they are. They take effect wherever they are currently in play. And so this whole game is about obviously racing to get these 3 protocols flipped over, and trying to manipulate the cards, trying to manipulate maybe your opponent's cards, etc. Now, first time I played this with my wife, just maybe a week or so back at our local speakeasy. I think this was right around my birthday. And it was a good, tense, tight game. It had been a little while since we played. It's one of those games I always have to kind of go and revisit the rules, and I'll still say that there's a lot of stuff that isn't covered. I don't know if there's an FAQ out there for this. I probably need to look that up. But there are a couple of wordings on the cards that just aren't clear. When it says shift a card, well, does that mean any card? Because it doesn't say any card. So does that mean it's only on my side of the tableau? Like, there's a lot of just simple words left out that would make things a lot more clear if they had added them in. But we had a good battle. I was basically like 2 turns away from finishing my last protocol. I sort of had my path played out in my hand. She played a card that then shifted something on top of one of my cards that I was planning on flipping over and putting into effect. I was able to sort of recover, but it added an extra turn, and basically 1 turn before I was going to win, she won. So it was this real nice kind of tight, tense battle. I then played it again just last week with Daniel, and it was a very, very different experience. This is not his type of game, but we had just a little bit of time left. I knew we could teach it pretty quickly. So we sat down and I explained it, and then as we were starting to draft our protocols, he saw the fear deck. He goes, I'm going to take fear because I am quite scared of playing this game. Not really sort of realizing that it was the opponent who should fear that deck. And that deck was an absolute thorn in my side for our entire playthrough. Constantly forcing me to discard cards, forcing me to return cards to my hand, just constantly sort of stepped in the way of what I was trying to get done. A lot of the stuff that I picked was more drawing effects, playing extra card effects, maybe sort of shifting what I had, but very little of what I was seeing in my deck let me really affect anything that he was doing. And one element of this game, and I'll wrap this up here pretty quick, is that the cards go from either 0 to 5 or 1 to 6, something like that. They may skip a number in there somewhere. Again, there's only 6 cards per protocol. And if you've got, say, the 6 and the 5 or the 5 and the 4 or something like that in one of your protocols, in 2 cards, in 2 turns, you can pretty much be ready to compile that protocol. Now, if I have a higher value than you, you can't compile. And of course, I would typically compile and you would lose your cards anyways. They just get discarded. You get to try again. But in a particular instance, actually maybe even 2 instances, Daniel had a bunch of cards in one of his protocols. He played them all in a row, 3, 4, 5, or 5, 6, something like that. And I had nothing in my hand that I could even play to that. I did not have the cards of that opposing protocol in my hand to even combat him. I could do nothing but just sit and watch him finish the game, because it was going to take me 3 or 4 or 5 turns to get enough cards out face down to exceed his value to prevent him from being able to compile, and clearly there wasn't enough time to do that. And so even as it was, he got his first two compiled very quickly. I think I had 1, maybe 2 of mine done, but I was nowhere near on the 3rd, and he dropped 2 cards in 2 turns, and I said, well, that's just it. I'm out. There's nothing I can do to stop you. You've got this game. And so it's kind of, again, it's one of those sort of, maybe if you really, really know the decks, you could do well. Maybe if the luck of the draw kind of has a bit to weigh in on. I did feel like that fear deck was really, really powerful, often causing me to forcing me to discard my entire hand. One that forced me to discard the entire hand and then draw back up to the number of cards I had discarded -1, just stuff like that. So I was constantly like, okay, I got a plan. Oh, there went that entire plan out the window. Now I have nothing. And I got to sit here and kind of come up with a new idea as he's just dropping all these cards down. So it was I do still like the game. We were talking about it afterwards. I compared this, and I have compared this a long time, to the game of Air, Land, and Sea, which is a really, really fun, very, very simple little card game. It's even a smaller box than this one kind of overall. But I realized as we were chatting about it how different they really are, in that Air, Land, and Sea you're actually playing for points. You're playing across the same 3 theater idea, but theaters of war, Air, Land, and Sea. But you're going to play until you're kind of out of cards. You're going to see who's winning across each theater, and depending on who has the overall victory, they get a couple of points. But the opponent can at any point basically surrender that round, and their opponent will get far less points depending on where in the process they surrender. And so it makes it this far more interesting and tactical game where you actually don't want to go in too strong, because then your opponent's just going to surrender and you're going to get 1 point. You got to keep trying. It actually made me want to revisit Air, Land, and Sea a little more. This game is neat. I love the way the cards look in this thing. They look fantastic, but it's just never ever been a super welcoming or super rewarding experience out of Compile. Talk too much about that one. Up next, all right, so this is one of the games I picked up last week or a couple weeks ago on my trip to Charlotte. I mentioned getting this one for a pretty good deal. This is Spectacular. This is from Chillafox Games. I can't say I've ever heard of them. Designers are Elif Svensson and Asmund Svensson. This is a game on paper about building a sort of a wildlife park and trying to sort of a wildlife conservation park. There's a bunch of different animals in this game. There is even a nice little sheet that tells you all about the different animals. And you're playing out, you have a basic map of hexagonal spaces. You're going to be playing tiles into these spaces representing different animals. There are 4 different biomes in the game, sort of like forest or grass, and I don't know, maybe desert, water, and whatever the 4th one is, maybe kind of mountainous, something like that. As you're playing those tiles out, you're sort of building environments of these different colors. So generally you want to try and keep colors and sort of contiguous, connected to each other. It won't always happen that way. You're also trying to get some of these tiles arranged into a specific grouping. So some of these tiles will have a little third of a circle on one of those 6 points of the hexagon. And if you manage to get 3 of those together, all meeting in the middle, then you have just built a tower, one of the sort of iconic watchtowers on the front of the box, which is just represented by a single little column of wood that you place on the board. It's just supposed to kind of help you visually see that, okay, hey, you have a tower there. As you're playing these tiles, you're sort of setting up the environment, but you're also going to have to place dice on these tiles for specific effects. So if you have a tower, you can place 6-value dice on any of the spaces, the 3 tiles around that tower. You can have dice on those tiles before the tower, but they can't be a 6. There are also, I kept forgetting what they're called, like birthing tiles, offspring tiles, something like that. They have a little heart on them, and those tiles can only hold a 1 or 2 value die. And then the way that the scoring works is that you're going to, at the end of the game, you're going to look at all of the regions of color that you have. You're going to add up all the pips of all the dice in that colored region, and then multiply that number by the number of those birthing tiles that have a die on them. So if you've got an area of several tiles, you got a bunch of dice on it, but maybe you don't have any of those birthing tiles, or you have one and you never got a value 1 or 2 die on it, you score 0 points, nothing. Of course, if you have one of those tiles, you're going to get simply 1 times your score, 2 of those tiles, twice the score of those pips, etc. The towers are going to simply score the tiles around it, or of course, again, you can have some 6s. And then there's also this initial scoring round, which I'll admit doesn't make a ton of sense. In the first round of the game, after I think it was 8 actions, 8 turns, you're going to score from the entrance of your park. There's kind of like a little ticket that tells you where the entrance is. And you're trying to have dice all connected to each other off of that entrance. And if you manage to get a bunch of dice that all connect back to the entrance, you're going to simply score the pips of those dice in that round, and then you're going to play another 7 turns, and then you're going to score all the other stuff that I've already mentioned. And it was weird because right off the get-go, so my wife and I played this. It's a simultaneous action game. You're kind of drafting back. So you have a couple of resources, a couple of tiles and dice that are on your board. They're kind of your own personal supply. And they actually connect to the board that you have in front of you. So each board has a specific special animal that doesn't appear anywhere else in the game. I think mine was a flamingo. And so I have a special set of flamingo-based components, right? And then you have another supply tile that has additional generic hexagonal tiles and generic dice. And you're going to draft one and then swap or pass to your left, draft one, pass to your left, draft one, etc. Right off the get-go, in initial setup, my wife rolled a ton of 6s, like 4 or 5 of them, out of 8 dice. I got 1 6. She actually ended up re-rolling one of them because she thought maybe I actually have too many 6s. Well, except for that, she got a bunch of those 6s out into play with a couple towers, all connected back to that entrance within the first 8 turns. And so I think my starting scoring, my first scoring was like 12 points, and hers was 37 or something like that. And so right off the get-go, I was fighting against that for the whole rest of the turn, knowing that all those 6s were only going to come back and bite me again, especially if she got multipliers attached to them, which she did by the end of the game. And so, I mean, at the end of this, I think it was 164 to like 105. I got slaughtered in this game. And the other thing of it was that it reminded me so much of Calico, the one sort of cat knitting game. You're trying to get patterns of quilt material into this isolated tableau in front of you. Just like this game, you have a set region in which you have to play. You're only going to be able to play within that space. You can't just sort of place tiles wherever you want like you can with Cascadia. And again, you're looking for very, very specific values. You have to have certain numbers in certain places. Again, you cannot play some of these dice unless you have something already in place. And so it just became this absolute crapshoot of luck to be able to get anything done. And so there was one instance where as we were going into the second half of the game, you refresh your supply boards, and I needed a gray 6. What I needed was a gray tile or just any tile, with a black tower symbol on it. I had 2 tiles. I basically had 2/3 of my black tower, and I just needed one more tile that I could place there to finish that tower. We got all of our tiles out. We sort of stacked up the boards, got everything all set up, and I looked. There were none. There were none in play. I already had all the rest of my own personal tiles revealed. I knew from that point, in the middle of the game, I knew that I was never going to be able to finish that tower, and I was basically screwed because I had a gray 6 I was ready to place on that tower, and I couldn't do it. And it was really, 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 really frustrating because I'll say this. Now, in a 2-player game, you only have one person to swap these supply tiles with. You kind of just get the same 2 boards back and forth. So if you didn't like much that was on your board in 2 turns, you're stuck with the same damn board again. This plays up to 6. If you had, 3 or 4, I think people are saying like 4 is the sweet spot, then you're going to see a lot more variety. You're only going to see that same board maybe one more time. Granted, what you may want on it might already be gone, but you're going to see a lot more variety of stuff coming across the table. So I would say this is not a very good game at 2. It is way too luck dependent for my tastes. I mean, my wife and I we do pretty good with games. I obviously play a ton of games, and so to have a 60-point blowout on a game as light as this kind of tells you just how luck dependent this really is. Did not enjoy this at all. We'll try it with our daughter, and there was also a sort of like a mission variant that I might try and check out. I've read that that's pretty good, but if it just doubles down in the luck, I don't think that's going to change anything for me. All right, last title to talk about, the one I'm actually, I think, most interested to share with you, is Fortunes of Scoundrel Bay. This is from, who is this from? This is also from Chillafox. How did I not catch that before? Don't know. Also from Chillafox. And it is also from Alif Svensson and Asmund Svensson. How did I not catch this? We are learning something together, my friends. Anyways, this is it's a fairly interesting game. about sailing the open seas as a bunch of pirates. And I will say the last time I taught this, I kept saying the word Vikings. I'm going to try not to do that in this video. You've got a player board in front of you in this game representing your pirate ship. It has a couple of attributes on the left side that you're adjusting throughout the game. It has some spots across the top to store various resources. It has spaces on the right to store your pirates, including possibly some wounded pirates. Then it has spaces underneath that you can stack cards. The cards themselves are a multi-purpose or multi-function card where you're going to be playing a card on your turn, but taking 3 different potential actions from that single card play. All the actions that you're taking happen on this main board, which is very colorful, very, very pretty board. And it shows this it's kind of hard to explain, but it has sort of an entrance point. You sort of loop over a port and loop under another port, and then it kind of becomes just a big oval. You could possibly, theoretically, do a couple laps around the right side of this board. You won't have time for that, though. There are different spaces on this map. There are beaches where you can dig up treasure. There are villages where you can pick up crates that then want to be delivered to various ports in the game. You can go to those ports to either deliver those components, simply pillage some stuff from some enemy ships, or possibly do some trading to pick up various benefits. And then there are also these hideout locations which don't do anything in the game, but can be quite a source of points at the end of the game. You're playing these cards to do things like recruit more pirates on your ship. You kind of have a supply off the side of your player color. You can add more pirates to your ship. You can also move, and you will probably see in some of these photos that there are little enemy tokens along each of the water spaces. When you move into a space with an enemy monster, you have to fight it. If you win that fight, you'll get relatively minor bonuses. And if you lose the fight, you might take some damage. You might even have to kill off one of your pirates, not Vikings. And then also you will be infiltrating or invading these different spaces on the map, which does kind of have this weird tweak to it because you're invading a beach. There's nobody on the beach, but you're invading the beach to go and find treasure. Okay, fine. And the whole idea is that as you're stacking up these cards underneath your player board, you're going to accumulate these flag icons. You're going to see these pre-printed on the board itself, and then we're going to have a couple of these cards underneath these slots on the board. Each of these spots on the main board have a colored flag, and so you're going to be playing a card of the matching color to invade that space, sending in the number of pirates equal to or less than the number of flags shown on your board with a minimum of 1, and that's very important. So you have to send at least one pirate down, and can send more up to as many flags as you have on your ship. And so you can run into an instance sometimes where, okay, I'm at a spot, I really want to go to that beach and get some treasure, but I need a black card. I don't have any black cards, and there are currently none face up on the display. There is a mechanism where you can spend a bunch of rum to kind of go fish and find the color card you need from the deck. It is very, very expensive to do. But other than that, you're going to these spaces, you're sort of doing whatever you want to do. I mean, it's very almost sort of open world in nature. You may choose to kind of skip over a couple spaces. Again, maybe you don't have the right colored cards. Maybe you want to try and sort of stay ahead of the fight against these monsters. There is a reputation board on the side, and as you climb it, you're going to get various rewards. And the main way to climb that is by defeating these sea monsters. And I briefly mentioned the attributes on your ship. Those attributes are going to determine the strength of your pirates, maybe the offensive and defensive strength of your ship. There's also a cooking sort of track as you have to feed your pirates at certain points throughout the game, and so on and so forth. Your ship can also take damage that's equal to negative points at the end of the game, etc. I could go on quite a bit about how this plays. I'm going to try and go ahead and kind of skip to a summary. This game is really, really interesting. I like it. I still am wondering if it's got some flaws to it. One of the biggest things that we ran into in our first play, which is my wife and I, is I was just doing great. I had a pile of money coming in. I was kind of way ahead of her on the track. I'd fought a bunch of monsters. I was way up on the reputation track. I was just kicking butt and taking names. And then I got to a certain spot. I deployed a couple of pirates to dig up some treasure because I was getting a ton of rewards from that, and I had a bunch of crates that I was going to deliver at the next port until I realized I had no pirates left on my boat. My boat was completely empty. Even my captain had left the boat. You had this sort of extra-sized Captain Meeple. They count as 2 pirates, but deploy for the same cost of 1. And he was already on the board somewhere. And so there was literally nobody on my boat. My supply was empty. I had all the pirates on the board I was ever going to get. And I suddenly realized, well, I can't go and do anything because every action that happens on the main board requires you to have pirates in that space. If you want to dig up a treasure, you have to have as many pirates in that space as the value of the treasure you're trying to dig up, level 1, 2, or 3. If you're trying to pick up a crate to deliver somewhere, you have to have as many pirates there as the value of the crate. If you want to deliver that crate, you also have to have pirates in that port equal to the level of the crate, so on and so forth. And so I found myself with several turns still left to go, basically done. There was nothing else that I could do in the game except for continue to sail, even though the boat was empty, continue to fight monsters, even though there was no one left on my boat, until I eventually just triggered the end game by crossing a certain spot on the water, and you still had 2 more turns to take where, again, I really couldn't do anything except for fight some monsters. There are also ways that you can move your pirates around on the board, crossing into adjacent areas, but the ability to do that is very limited. You don't get a ton of opportunities to do so, and there is no way to move them back onto your boat. And so I kind of found myself like, well, crap, what do I do now? I just got to run out the clock and kind of hope that my wife doesn't catch up to me too much, which she did in a lot of ways, actually. I did still win the game, but it wasn't nearly the blowout we kind of expected. I played this again with Daniel, now mindful of that, and of course I made sure I explained that to him. He still ran into the same problem, running out of guys and sort of like that last turn of the river. I did manage to keep a couple of people. I basically just skipped all of these sort of pick up and deliver aspect of the game, got to the last port, which is actually Fortune Bay, or Scoundrel Bay. I keep getting the words confused. Managed to drop off some people and won sort of a majority there, because that's the other thing, is that endgame scoring, obviously your money is just your points. You can spend money throughout the game. There are events that you kind of bid on as to whether they're going to happen to you or maybe not happen to you if they're negative. So there are some ways to spend money, lots of different resources to manage in the game. But then each of those areas kind of has their own little thing. So actually all of your pirates left on beaches die at the end of the game, and there is some pretty significant penalties for having pirate deaths. The villages are worth a couple of points. The strongholds or hideouts, as I mentioned, can actually be worth a ton of points at the end of the game. They just don't do anything during the game. And then each of the ports has a majority. So whoever has the most pirates gets the most extra points at the end of the game. And then actually in Fortune Bay, you're going to be placing money on Fortune Bay throughout the game, and the player who has the majority there takes half of that money, and the other players start to split half and half and such, etc. Again, I'm still going on about the rules. I'm trying not to, but it's really, really, really interesting, because you really have to think about, what do I want to do? Where do I want to focus? Where do I want to put pirates at? If I'm putting a bunch of pirates into a beach to get treasure, which is great benefit, especially having some cash in hand, because that treasure, any rewards you get from it immediately, versus picking up crates, you don't get any money from them until you drop them off. And you're also spending food throughout the game at those ports to use your trading actions. Oddly enough, you don't spend money to get things at the ports. You spend food, which is kind of weird. And maybe that's actually a good point to sort of diverge off, is that the game is kind of weird. The whole idea that, yeah, I'm spending food to trade instead of money. The whole idea that I can eventually just get everyone off my boat and I have this kind of ghost ship sailing the waters, even without a captain, is weird. In fact, the captain can leave the ship in the first turn of the game if you want to. It's entirely up to you. He eats a little more, so it might actually be a benefit to you to get him off the boat. But then you've got to kind of deal with, managing all those people. And then towards the end of the game, you still have to feed at certain points, but you have nobody to feed. You're not feeding the people on the islands. It's only the people on your boat. And so there are just some elements of this that fall off the theme wagon pretty hard. And I've really had I'd love to try and come up with some ideas of just some little house rules, like little things like your captain always comes back to the boat. You can use him for the current action, but maybe he always comes back to your boat at the end of the turn. And that way you can always at least do some little things as you're marching towards the end of the game. It does seem like from comments online that the designers tried to actually work off of this. They wanted this to happen. They wanted you to kind of be able to get caught up without having anybody on the boat. And I get it, but I don't know that A, it makes any thematic sense whatsoever, and B, it just makes the last couple of your turns of the game boring as all hell, as you're suddenly just basically trying to push the end game and hope again that your opponents don't catch up to you and score because maybe they've been a little bit more careful with their crew. But that's not to say that I think the game is broken. It's just weird. It's different. It is pretty interesting. I have played it twice now, and I've really had a good time with it both times. I like the mechanisms. I like the things that you do. I like the multi-use cards. The art direction is really, really nice. The components are really, really nice. All of the recruiting actions, it's all about timing things at the right point. Sometimes you really just want to sit still a little bit and build up your ship before you move on. You can't do the same action twice in a row, so that also creates some really tense decisions where you go, well, hey, if I can camp here for 2 more turns, I can get some more strength to my ship and then go on to the next fight and be ready. But if I wait too long, maybe my opponent's going to take the fight that I wanted to get because I want to be at that. It's just you're sitting there going, oh, I don't know what choice to go with. And it's stressful, and it kind of makes sense. So I have really had some fun with this. I do want to try it out solo. I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to do that anytime soon, but a really, really neat idea. Fortunes of Scoundrel Bay. All right, that is it for games for this episode. Let me go ahead and ask you about the question for next week. I would like you to tell me about a time that you got to share the board game love. And what I mean by that is maybe you kind of just ran into a stranger, you ended up talking about games, maybe you just kind of came across a random conversation and got to sort of share the love of board gaming in a way that maybe made someone go, hey, I really want to check that out. That sounds kind of neat. Did you ever get to share the board game love? That is a question for next week or next episode. Make sure to catch that episode where I will talk about Everdell Emerald and Scoundrel Bay from Shem Phillips. I'll chat with you about it then, folks. Cheers.